The rules. One of the older board members, a man with white hair and a sharp voice, cut in. I've been on this board for 10 years, Karen, and I've never seen someone abuse their position like this. You do realize this video could go viral, right? We'd be the laughingstock of the county. Karen froze, realizing for the first time that her iron grip on the board was slipping. She tried to regain control. If we let them get away with this, everyone will start breaking the rules. It'll be chaos. My wife tilted her head, her voice still calm. Or maybe, if we handle this fairly, people will trust the board again. The president nodded slowly. I think I've seen enough. He turned to the other board members, who were already whispering among themselves. Within minutes, the vote was unanimous. Karen's vice chair position was suspended pending a full review. The sanctions against us were dismissed. And just like that, Karen's smug expression crumbled like wet cardboard. She stood up. The morning of the meeting with the contractor broke gray and heavy, with low clouds pressing down on the ridge like a warning. We arrived at the site just before 6, headlights cutting through the damp mist that clung to the gravel loop near the retaining wall. The wall itself stood about 70 feet long and 5 feet tall, built from stacked stone and concrete, a quiet monolith holding back the slope that angled down toward the lake's edge and the row of cabins clustered below. If that wall failed, runoff from the upper loop would barrel through basements like a freight train, and judging by the fresh erosion cuts near the culvert, we didn't have a lot of time before the next storm pushed things past the edge. Karen was already there, pacing tight circles beside a pickup that looked like it had seen 20 years of back roads and bad decisions. She wasn't in her usual red blazer. Instead, she wore a plain windbreaker and jeans, and she looked 10 years older than she had in the tribunal. The contractor stood next to her, arms crossed, jaw clenched, a clipboard under one arm and a bright orange coffee thermos in his hand. He didn't acknowledge us right away. Just looked at the wall, then at the clouds, then back at the wall like it owed him answers. My wife greeted him politely and asked if he had the invoices and specs. He nodded and handed over a stack of papers thicker than a phone book. She flipped through them with methodical precision, checking the material codes, payment schedules, and signed authorization slips. Karen watched her the whole time, silent, barely blinking, until my wife stopped on page 24 and held it up. This one, she said, tapping the line with her finger. This is the one that breaks it. Karen stepped forward. What are you talking about? My wife showed her the line. This invoice is marked as paid from HOA emergency reserves. But the corresponding transaction on the statement doesn't match the amount. It's off by $4,900. And the line item on the ledger is marked as Community Engagement Landscaping. Karen's face shifted. That's a clerical error. I logged it under the wrong category. The contractor frowned. That's not what you told me. You said it came from a private donation drive. My wife didn't raise her voice. She just looked at Karen. How many sources of funding were you tracking, and why weren't any of them audited? Karen's jaw clenched. Because no one else wanted to do the job. Everyone wants clean streets and nice parks, but no one wants to lift a finger. I kept this place from falling apart. The contractor cut in. I'll tell you what's falling apart. The rebar under the west side of that wall. I warned her last month it needed reinforcement. She said she'd get the funds but never followed up. Said she was handling it. He made air quotes with his coffee hand. My wife nodded. Which means if that wall gives way and damages the lower loop, the liability will fall on the HOA, and by extension, every homeowner listed in the current governance records. Karen's expression cracked. But it won't fail. It just needs a few minor touch-ups. We don't need to panic. The contractor looked up at the sky and shook his head. You've got 72 hours. Maybe less. If it rains tonight and that slope shifts, I'm not putting my license on the line to clean up the mess. My wife turned to Karen one last time. You said you wanted to protect this community. So give me the authority to fix it. Officially. You step back, I step in. We filed for emergency funds, get it done right. No backdoors. No fake invoices. No hiding money in mulch receipts. Karen stared at her, blinking rapidly, like she was trying to find a reason to say no that wouldn't also ruin her entirely. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. Finally, she nodded, once, curt and tired. Do it. My wife stepped away and made the call. The State Mitigation Office had a direct line for field-authorized emergency repairs. By noon, a mobile inspection unit would arrive. By nightfall, assuming the paperwork was clear, we'd have the green light for discretionary funding release. But while the gears began to move, another issue surfaced, literally. As the crew began prepping the site for reinforcement work, one of the workers unearthed a small, weathered lockbox buried just behind the western edge of the wall. They thought it was an old utility cache. It wasn't. My wife opened it with a crowbar and found inside a dozen sealed envelopes labeled with years going back over a decade, each one marked HOA dues override or payment adjustment. Inside were handwritten notes, some bearing Karen's initials, detailing alternate payment plans for select residents, fee reductions not listed in any ledger, and letters addressed to former board members thanking them for their discretion. This wasn't just about misplaced funds anymore. It was a history of side deals, favors, and manipulations stitched into the financial spine of the HOA. One letter even referenced the original founder of the community offering Karen a provisional role contingent on her keeping the dues balanced quietly during economic downturns. What had started as a possibly noble attempt to keep the neighborhood afloat had morphed into a shadow governance system that no one had ever voted on. When Karen saw the documents, she didn't argue. She just sat on the tailgate of the contractor's truck, her face pale and distant, watching as the crew carried the lockbox to the state inspector for documentation. She didn't speak for the rest of the morning. My wife, however, did. She called a meeting that evening in the community hall. Not an HOA tribunal. Not a disciplinary hearing. A town hall. Open mic. Everyone invited. She explained the wall situation, the funding, the documents in the lockbox, and Karen's unofficial system. She didn't attack her. Didn't frame her as a villain. She told the truth. Laid out the history. The pattern. The consequences. The whole room listened in that thick, stunned silence people reserve for news that rearranges the foundation of everything they thought they understood. Some people stood up to defend Karen, saying she helped them during tough times. Others asked why the rest of the community had been left in the dark while deals were made behind closed doors. Karen didn't speak. Not until the end. Then, slowly, she stood and walked to the front. No blazer. No clipboard. No allies flanking her. Just her voice, rough and shaking. She admitted to the documents. The workaround payments. The late-night ledger edits. She said she thought she was doing what no one else wanted to do. Keeping the peace. Avoiding chaos. But I made it worse, she said. Because I stopped trusting people. I made decisions alone, and I let fear run the show. No one applauded. But no one interrupted either. Afterward, my wife announced the state had approved the funding release, and construction on the wall's reinforcement would begin immediately. Oversight would be handled by a new, rotating committee voted in that night. Karen didn't run for a seat. She didn't stay to count ballots. The rain came down in sheets that night, not the soft kind that makes you curl up with a blanket and forget the world, but the relentless, pounding kind that tests every seam, every window latch, every gutter and slope and wall holding back the weight of water. We stayed up long past midnight, the sound of it echoing off the roof, drumming like 1,000 fingers trying to tap their way inside. I checked the security cameras twice and scrolled local weather reports, half expecting some alert to flash red across the screen. My wife, calm as ever, sat on the couch flipping through the site logs from the contractors, one leg tucked beneath her like she had all the time in the world. Outside, you could almost hear the hillside straining under the pressure, but inside the cabin it was oddly still, as if the air itself understood what had just passed and what still lingered. By morning, the storm had emptied itself, and a strange hush fell over the entire valley. The lake swelled an inch or two higher against the shore, the gravel drive was a slurry of mud and tire tracks, and the stone wall, miraculously, still stood. The reinforcement crews arrived early, soggy and shivering but alert, and they circled the wall like doctors checking a heartbeat. One of them gave a quiet thumbs up to my wife, who nodded back without speaking. Karen's name hadn't been mentioned in days. Not in town, not in any HOA communication, not even in the usually dramatic group chats that had once buzzed with every minor shrub disagreement. It was as if she had vanished in plain sight, erased by the very silence she used to fill with noise. We figured she was licking her wounds or perhaps meeting with a lawyer somewhere, plotting a way to slither back into the HOA infrastructure through some forgotten technicality. But that's not what happened. Instead, 2 days later, a UPS truck pulled up outside our cabin, and the driver dropped off a single box addressed to my wife in neat, careful handwriting. No return address. No explanation. She opened it slowly, peeling back the cardboard flaps like she half expected a trap. Inside was Karen's red blazer, folded with almost absurd precision, and on top of it, a handwritten note that said only this: "It was never supposed to go this far." That was it. No name, no plea, no confession. Just the blazer and the weight of it. My wife read it twice, then placed the note back in the box and carried the whole thing to the storage shed without a word. I didn't ask what she planned to do with it. She didn't say. But from that day forward, things shifted in the neighborhood. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But like a slow unwinding of something that had been wound too tight for too long. At first, it was little things. The couple 2 cabins down started leaving a picnic table near the lake again, no longer hiding it in their garage during non-approved hours. An elderly woman who had stopped walking her dog in the afternoons began strolling past our porch again, waving shyly. And most notably, the new HOA board, half made up of residents who had never spoken at meetings before, began distributing notices that actually sounded human. No fines, no veiled threats, just reminders and gentle updates. They started organizing things Karen would have called a risk: open mic nights, bonfires, seed exchanges, even a community garden planning session. My wife helped them draft the new guidelines, not because she wanted power but because she understood the language of structure, of policies that support without crushing. And while she attended the meetings, she always sat in the back, notebook open, listening more than speaking, guiding with the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need titles to be followed. Then, one evening, just as we were locking up for the night, a car pulled into our driveway that we hadn't seen in weeks. Karen stepped out, not in her SUV this time but in a small hatchback that looked borrowed. She wore jeans, a gray hoodie, and no makeup. She stood by the hood, uncertain, until my wife opened the door and gestured her in. No one said anything at first. We sat around the kitchen table, the same one that had once held Karen's bogus complaint letters and tribunal subpoenas. Now it held mugs of tea, a plate of biscuits, and the soft weight of unresolved history. Karen looked older, not physically exactly, but as if something fundamental had unraveled and taken its scaffolding with it. She cleared her throat finally and said, "I wanted to apologize. Not officially. Just honestly." My wife nodded and waited. Karen's voice cracked once. "I thought if I controlled everything, I could keep things from falling apart. My marriage, my job, this place. When the old board started stepping down, I took over because no one else would. And I liked it. The attention. The authority. I thought I was helping. And then I couldn't stop." My wife listened, hands folded on the table. "But it wasn't help anymore," Karen continued. "It was fear. Of letting go. Of not being needed." She swallowed. "You didn't just stop me. You reminded me that the community wasn't supposed to be about control. It was supposed to be about trust. I forgot that." My wife finally spoke. "You didn't have to do it alone, Karen. You made yourself the wall, but you never let anyone reinforce it. And you can't hold back an entire neighborhood forever." Karen's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded slowly. "I left the board for good. They asked me to stay on in some way, but I said no. It's better this way. I need to figure out who I am without the blazer." They both smiled faintly at that. We didn't ask where she was staying now or what came next.